We've reached a milestone, 18 months of intense negotiations with the US-China trade war. US President Donald Trump described it as a momentous step that has never been taken before with China. A busy morning for you, Finbarr.
Very busy. We've been looking through this near 90-page document, which is a little bit longer than we expected, but very slim in the grand scheme of things when it comes to trade agreements. About half the size of the text with which the negotiators were working when talks collapsed last April. Now, this is a relatively superficial deal. Most analysts agree. There's a big purchase agreement in there for China to buy $200 billion worth of US goods and services. There's some stuff around intellectual property, technology transfer, currency. But I think it's fair to say that most trade watchers are underwhelmed by this. In fact, I saw one of them say this morning that he's overwhelmed by how underwhelmed he is by this deal, which is a great line. Most of the provisions around currency and intellectual property we have heard before, either in statements from China or in other agreements. So there is an enforcement mechanism, but again, this just allows the US to unilaterally put China's tariffs on China if it doesn't live up to its commitments, which is essentially what it was doing anyway. So we're really not sure what's very new on that front either.
Well, that's great economic colour, and of course China is off the manipulators list this week. Rob, I want to bring you in.
Well, it was a grand ceremony. Trump had 200 people in the East Room, and it was a very broad spectrum of people. It included farmers, it included lawmakers, it included CEOs of very large companies, energy companies like Cheniere, which is now selling natural gas to China. Mm-hmm. It had Henry Kissinger in the front row. Yes. And so the optics were very grand, and that's just how Trump rolls. So that was all of the presentation of it was very much in line with the way Trump and his administration is presenting this deal, which is that they have finally resolved this problem, one of the US's biggest problems when it comes to foreign policy and when it comes to its economy and when it comes to trade.
Well, of course, as Asia wakes up to these news images, how should the rest of the world interpret this? Both sides need to declare this as a win. So how will the US and China spin this?
From the Chinese side, the state media has been they were fairly muted initially in their response. They portrayed this as a win-win. And in fact, that's a phrase which has been used throughout the negotiations by China. It was used in his speech in the White House by Vice Premier Liu He last night, and it was used in his press conference with select media as well. So China is very keen to give across the message that it did not made grand concessions to the US, that this is more a meeting of equals, and that it's a mark of maturity that after all of the tumultuous 18 months that we've just had, these sides have been able to put their differences behind them and come to an agreement. China's trying to portray this as, I guess, a sign of a country that is a good international actor willing to make reasonable progress on important matters.
And Rob, what about the US side? Is this a beautiful distraction, as some might call it?
Well, it certainly works well as a distraction because, as we know, Trump is facing an impeachment trial in the Senate. He has already been impeached in the House of Representatives. So, of course, he wants to deflect attention away from that. There's a discussion underway in Washington and other generally political circles about what was in fact going on in Iran. So this is a great way to do it. He was able to stand up and say, according to his interpretation of how things have unfolded, that he has managed to accomplish what all of his predecessors were never managed to do. And of course, he was showing footage in this roll of the ceremony that the White House put out, showing George W. Bush and showing Barack Obama and showing Clinton all in these negotiating tables with China. But then it cuts to himself saying, "My promise was kept. This is finally done."
And now I want to move away sort of from today's sort of spectacle and talk about what is actually enforceable as part of this phase one deal. The values of products and services. China has agreed to purchase are eye-wateringly big, 200 billion. Is that possible in reality?
Possible, of course. That's the short answer. China's a managed economy and it can buy as much or as little as it wants. Whether it is a good idea to buy an additional $200 billion of goods and services on top of 2017's level is another question. If China buys an extra $200 billion from the US, it means that somebody else is going to lose out, be that Brazil in the case of soybeans, Australia for beef, Saudi Arabia for oil, the European Union for manufactured goods. So you know, this is something which we've been reporting in the run-up to this, that Liu He was careful to say in his press conference in Washington, you know, that the structural terms of the deal will also be available to China's other trading partners. So we perceive that as a way of heading off the criticism that China will be, in a sense, annoying other trading nations by agreeing this with the United States. Back to imports, of course, if China makes all these purchases over 2 years, what happens after that? You know, if you furnish your house 1 year, you don't necessarily have to do it the year after that or the year after that. You know, once you make a huge purchase, then do you really need to keep doing that? So the question is it better for US exporters and US farmers to have constant access to the Chinese market, or to have this one-off purchase agreement? That is an ongoing debate among economists.
Okay, well, that's a great analogy that you use there. So talking about looking into the future, you know, dare I ask, Rob, swinging this over to you, what's next? You know, when will we see a phase 2? What is it going to take to end this trade war?
It will take a lot, and I don't think anyone's expecting an end to the trade war anytime soon. You have to consider that while they go into this period where they're going to start discussing the more substantive issues in phase 2, at the same time the US government is launched multiple efforts to disconnect US industry from companies like Huawei and ZTE in China, because the US government has really viewed them, both the Trump administration and many lawmakers see these companies as national security threats. So they're taking measures. For example, the Federal Communications Commission is now coming up with measures to require rural network operators to rip out their Huawei gear. And they're coming up with money, or their proposals to come up with money to do that. At the same time, the State Department is trying to convince all of Washington's allies and any other country that they should not be using Huawei equipment. So you have to wonder, at what point will this effort by the US government really start to affect or infect the negotiations, the ongoing trade negotiations? I don't see how they would not affect them at some point.
So give me a sense of timeline, before the elections or after?
No one's expecting phase 2 to be done before the elections.
Okay, well, looks like a cooling period is in place, but the show must go on. Thank you, gentlemen, for both coming in today.
Thank you, Elaine.